Ladies and gentlemen, this Gaming Silicon video, as 2016 is finally here and January starts to roll along, we're starting to see the emergence of various pieces of news from the tech industry as we prepare ourselves for the onslaught of new components over the next year or so. In this video we're going to be discussing a couple of crucial pieces of news. The first is Samsung's 14nm process is finally becoming almost close to fruition, and then we're going to be moving right along to AMD as they have once again confirmed the schedule for the Zen lineup of processors as well as APUs and other chips as well. So starting first of all with Samsung, it's fair to say that Samsung have a pretty critical role when it comes to technology now, not just because they produce of course their own lineup of phones, but they also produce the chips for many other companies, and it looks like, from what we understand anyway, AMD will also be utilising them for their fabrication of their own chips. However, it's a bit difficult at the moment to 100% know because there's not an official confirmation that Samsung / Global Foundries are pretty much a shoo-in. I'd be surprised if it's anyone else. Anyway, for some time, since late 2015, we were under the impression that Samsung were getting very close to volume production with 14nm, and now AMD must be pretty happy if they have indeed selected Samsung to be their partners, because according to various reports, one of them popping up on benchlife.info, they are indeed ready to ramp up to mass production of the 14nm process. This means that essentially they're no longer doing exploration, they know how to produce the chips in decent quantities, which is obviously kind of important. There's no point in producing, let's say, 1,000 chips and 70% of them are no use other than, I don't know, using as a keyring fob, for example. So that's obviously a good thing and does roll rather nicely into AMD, because if this schedule is to be believed, it ties in rather nicely with what AMD are telling us, and we'll move on to that in just a second. Because typically, when you start seeing the production, mass production, when you start entering mass production, it's not like it takes like 2 days and you've got a decent amount of, products to ship. No, it takes several months minimum. And so, let's say 6 to 9 months is really what it takes for a product to hit the shelves after initial testing and all of the other stuff that you have to go through. So it looks like it's good. So moving back to the logical follow-up for that, AMD. So AMD, as we all know, have been busy little beavers. They're putting a lot of investment into a couple of lineups of processors. Essentially, as we all know, AMD have split their company into multiple different divisions, but this means that if you really boil it down, we're waiting for Zen, we're waiting for the next generation of APUs, and finally we're waiting, of course, for the next generation of CPUs. So the first one would be that AMD have confirmed in their recent earnings call that Zen, the Zen-based Summit Ridge CPUs, will be arriving in 2016. Now, just to go through some of the stuff that we already know, essentially, it's going to be quite a significant departure from, let's say, the FX 8000 range or the FX 9000 range that we're used to today. There are some, things that are still very similar, but the actual workload of the chips, what they're capable of, the power utilization, the performance, the amount of cores, the fact that they're going to support SMT, simultaneous multi-threading, in other words, think hyper-threading, which would be kind of like saying, I don't know, the 477K, in other words, Intel i7 lineup. The fact that we're going to be seeing much improved IPC, about 40% over what they're currently putting out with the excavator cores, and we're going to be seeing, of course, also the introduction of low latency cache. High bandwidth memory, of course, will also be utilized with DDR4, and in essence, these things are going to kick ass. Obviously, we don't know how Intel are going to size up against AMD, because at the end of the day, we're not seeing review samples yet. But even if Intel are the same as AMD or slightly better, it's only going to be a good thing for the industry, because The top-end models for these CPUs is going to be pretty astounding. We're looking at somewhere in the region of an 8-core processor featuring a rather astounding amount of CPU cores, up to 8 CPU cores with 16 threads if you count SMT. As you're probably aware, they will indeed be utilising the AM4 socket, and it's kind of weird because now even the North Bridge is being moved on die, so obviously the chip is becoming considerably more complicated. With Summit Ridge, there is no GPU built in, so it's very much like, let's say, the 8350 or something like that. It's its own deal, which is kind of nice. I actually like that, because I feel that it gives you better control. Now, I'm not saying that I'm inherently against the fact that a GPU is built onto the CPU, in other words, it becomes an APU. I think it can be kind of handy if you're doing, let's say, fault testing, if you're selling your GPU, or your GPU needs to go back for RMA purposes, whatever. But typically, if I'm building a high-end performance desktop, then I don't really care about the built-in GPU that often. But, you know, your mileage may vary. According to AMD's Dr. Lisa Su, they will indeed be seeing, and well, this is the exact quote, "We will introduce the first desktop, so we are having a conversation with some of our PC OEMs about getting their platforms ready for the desktop, and will likely go into the enterprise server the full year in 2017. We have secured several key design wins with global OEMs for a Zen-based service CPU, and we believe we're readily established in our presence in data centers. Then we can bring a new products to the market in 2017. Naturally, it goes without saying that you're going to see all of the regular standards that you'd expect. DDR4, as I've already mentioned, SATA Express, USB 3.1, and all of the other bits and pieces that, well, pretty much go without saying for a next generation platform. It's obviously a really good thing, and from what we're being told, AMD know there's a lot of pressure on them, and indeed these comments have even from Lisa Su herself, as well as other key members of AMD. They've basically been, you know, I guess you could say, followed on Twitter, discussed via social media, received emails even. Essentially, they're being told, look, please give us a product that's going to kick ass, because we need it for the industry, you know, for the high-end components, and it's a good thing. Moving on to Bristol Ridge and APUs as a whole. So, once again, just to give you clarification, they will be once again on AM4, which means that if you decide 6 months down the line that you want to switch out a Bristol Ridge low-end processor with a high-end CPU, you are more than able to do so. Bristol Ridge is going to be utilizing GCN 3.0, as you could probably imagine. It's going to be aimed primarily at the mainstream market. Now, how much performance you're going to be receiving for these is kind of down to your imagination, but the highest range SKU, from what we're hearing from leaks, is going to be running at around 4 GHz boost, 2 MB of level 2 cache, 8 GPU CUs, so that's 512 SPs, because obviously we know that there's 64 shaders per one compute unit, which is something we've known, you know, for ages now, if you've been following along with the channel, excuse me. So the TDP is around 65 watts. If you're going to go down all the way to the lowest end, and obviously you can imagine the different configurations in between, then you're going to be looking at a core number of around 2, with a clock speed of around 2.8, assuming you're boosting. I say around because obviously these things could slightly change in a couple of months' time, but that's what we're looking at now. Finally, and I know this is probably not going to be particularly pertinent to many of you, but it might to some, and that would be the data center folks. So there was a time that AMD were very competitive actually for the server market. In fact, this was particularly true when there wasn't like cloud available, which was like, you know, 2007, 2008, that type of era, when, you know, before cloud really became a thing. AMD was certainly a very competitive option indeed. If you were selecting, let's say, a dedicated server solution, you would be able to choose between a Pentium 4 or an AMD solution, or various types of Pentium or Xenon class processors or AMD solutions. Now it's less so, and AMD have certainly lost a lot of market share with this, which is something that they're looking forward to being able to reclaim, at least hopefully on their behalf, with their new Optron lineup. As a little aside, by the way, Optron were also very, very, very popular with enthusiasts, because you can actually get ridiculous overclocks in many cases, because Optron chips were compatible with a lot of the motherboards, and so because they were made from really high quality silicon, you could get some insane overclocks. Not maybe to the degree of the what was it, the 2500M? Was it the 2500M? It's going to bug me now, I'm going to have to Google that later. But basically there were just mobile versions for laptops of the XP lineup of processors, and they were just insanely overclockable. I remember that I actually bought I think it was the desktop variant of the 2600. God, this is going back, and I remember that I kind of kicked myself because just shortly after I bought it, the mobile versions were like insanely overclockable and not that much more expensive. I remember kicking myself, but I got a good overclock of it anyway. I digress. So the Optron lineup is going to be hitting at around 2017. We don't know the number of cores available, but let's just go with more than one. It's going to be a lot. I'm hearing different reports, but how accurate they all are is down to your imagination, to be honest. AMD themselves are saying that the high-performance server APUs, and I quote, multi-teraflops for HPC and workstation HSA performance delivered, transformational memory architecture and scale-up graphics performance, which is a whole bunch of words to say that it's going to kick butt, at least theoretically. Several technologies are going to be included that you can almost guarantee, like high bandwidth memory 2, which is certainly going to be critical for powering the APU side of things when you've got the, loads of loads of CU cores in there. Obviously they are hungry for memory bandwidth, they're hungry hippos. And then you've got, of course, DDR4 support, which you can pretty much imagine. AMD do know that essentially they can't compete in all of the server market, because there are some specific circumstances where you might need, for example, IBM high super duper processors, which in certain cases you will, but there is, at least according to them, about 80% of the market they feel that these next generation CPUs will be able to be competitive in. But obviously it's not really down to a PR report for that. We have to eventually end up evaluating the products themselves. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. I am going to get going, and I hope you will join me in the next set of videos. But for now, take care of yourselves, have a great day, bye for now.